be the only thing between you and lunch, so I will be direct. I want to go back to your earlier comments today talking about growth, because I know the administration has talked about that. And the purpose of the growth, let's just put this in perspective in my mind, is we have a $20 trillion debt. You referred to that earlier.
Yes.
What we aren't talking about is unless we do something now to this baseline budget that we have today, that exists today, we'll add another $10 trillion to that debt over the next 10 years. I've got several questions. To get the growth to deal with this insurmountable debt, in my mind, there's some $200 trillion of debt in the world totally. 60 of that is basically sovereign debt. We have a third of that sovereign debt today. I just don't know how much longer the bond markets are going to allow us to continue to eat up more and more debt capital that way. And my question to you today, specifically on the debt, you mentioned that the size of the debt bothers you, but I think you might have said peripherally. So the question then is, if interest rates were to move to their more historic norm of somewhere around 5%, we'd be paying about $1 trillion of interest on this debt as it exists today. And also, the duration of our debt is very, very short. Some 60% or over half of our debt is 3 years or less, whereas Britain has moved their position to about 48% of theirs is 20 years or longer. So the question I have, first of all, is on the position of the debt, what's the Treasury's position relative to the budget, how it is dysfunctional, how it impacts the debt, and then how it is draining the ability to grow because of sucking more capital, more debt capital to the needs of the federal government?
Well, let me first comment on the duration, which you commented on, and I've talked about this publicly, that we are exploring what we call ultra-long bonds, 50-year bonds or 100-year bonds, to explore lengthening the duration. And we've reached out to the Treasury Borrowing Committee as well as institutional investors to explore whether it makes sense to do that.
But even I'm sorry to interrupt, but even moving more to 30-year treasuries would help.
It would.
It would just take longer to get.
It would, and we explore what the capacity is at different parts of the market and what the most efficient way is to extend the maturity. So that's something we're looking at.
So let's continue on with this debt. There's about $6 trillion, some estimates are greater than that aren't at work in the economy today. Roughly about $2 trillion on the Russell 1000 balance sheets, about $2 trillion on small community banks and regional banks, and then somewhere around $2 to $3 trillion overseas in unrepatriated profits. I know in your one-page tax proposal, you eliminate the repatriation tax. What else can you summarize for the committee that this tax bill will do relative to growth and dealing with unleashing that capital? Because it seems to me that the economic miracle of the last 70 years, Secretary, happened because of innovation, capital formation, and the rule of law. And we have messed around with capital formation here in the last 8 years. And I'd like to know what the administration's position is relative to growth, what we're doing regarding capital formation.
Well, I agree with you completely. And on the business side, we need to simplify and make the business tax system more competitive. And that starts with, we have a business rate that's way too high. It's one of the highest rates in the world. As you suggested, we tax on worldwide income. That encourages with deferral. That encourages our companies to leave trillions of dollars offshore. We want to bring that money back to put to work for the American workers. And we want to make the system work so that going forward, companies bring back their foreign earnings and reinvest it here. And we're also committed, not just on multinationals, but we're also committed that small and medium-sized businesses should have tax relief as well. That's the engine of growth in our economy.
Would you repeal Dodd-Frank if you were king for a day?
If I were king for the day, I would. I'd start all over, and I think most of it is unnecessary. But since I'm not king for the day, we went through what we thought the critical portions were, and we delivered to the president yesterday on our executive order. And we think about 70 or 80% of what's critical to get done, we can get done through executive orders and working with the regulators. And we look forward to working with the House and the Senate on other things.
When will we see that?
It came out last night, so
okay.
we'll make sure it's delivered to your office.
Right, thank you. One last question. Yeah, the budget process is broken. It's only worked 4 times in the last 43 years. This year, over the last 43 years, we've used 178 continuing resolutions. I just walked out of an Armed Services Committee hearing where we heard the dire straits of if we have another CR this year. There's almost guaranteed that we will not have a budget process that will be affected normally this year, and that we're headed for either a CR in the end of September. I think we have 43 days left, Senate working days left before the end of this fiscal year. So the best we could hope for would be an omnibus before that with that time. When the director of OMB was before the committee a couple weeks ago, we talked about this. You're involved in this from the Treasury. What's your perspective on the budget process that hasn't worked since '74, and what do you think we need to do to make this relevant so we can fund the government, which is the #1 priority of the Congress, according to Article 1, which we're not doing, and since 1921, when the OMB, or when the budget capability of the administration was created, it seems like the legislative responsibility has become less and less and less every year. So how would you, as part of the administration, advise us to move on this budget process that's not working?
Well, if I got to be king for a day, I'd probably choose to fix the budget process even over Dodd-Frank.
Would you really?
I would. I mean, it is completely broken. And I think there's the process of the budget, there's process of spending, and there's process of appropriation. And, you know, it's not going to be resolved this year, but this is something that, you know, I would look forward to working with you on.
Well, it's dire. We're supposed to appropriate 12 bills a year to fund the federal government. Over the last 43 years, we've averaged 2.5. It's just—
That's not a good record.
There's no way in any other environment
No sports team would be doing very well with that.
No, the coach would be gone, the quarterback would be gone, everybody would be gone.
That's the reason to drain the swamp.
Exactly. Mr. Chairman, I think we are out of questions. I want to thank you for appearing before the committee today. Your full statement will be included in the record. As information to all senators, questions for the record are due by 6 p.m. today, with signed hard copy delivered to the committee clerk in Dirksen 624. Under our rules, Secretary Mnuchin will have 7 days for receipt of our question to respond with our answers. With no further business, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.